With me in the studio this hour, Dan Perry is the author of Ask Questions Later, a newsletter, and the former Europe and Middle East editor for the Associated Press. Good to see you, Dan. Thank you very much for joining us. The Iranians have tied their attack on Israel now, it would seem, to the hostage talks due to take place on Thursday. Do you think they're trying to climb down from the very tall tree that they find themselves up?
It kind of looks that way. It would give them an exit ramp, as it were, because I don't think they necessarily want a huge war. They have gained so much, sad to say, from the past 10 months in a variety of ways that we can discuss at length later if you wish, that they would be wise to sort of take yes for an answer and de-escalate. Instead, they've maneuvered themselves into a position where their pride has forced them to threaten what would amount to an escalation. Now, it is a strange statement, because if an attack on Israel is somehow necessary, and they're honor-bound to do that as a result of the assassination of Haniyeh in Tehran while they were hosting him, that's one narrative. I fail to see how that connects to the talks in Gaza. It almost sounds like now they're threatening Israel, talks about Gaza. It sounds like they're threatening Israel with attack unless Israel capitulates to Hamas in some form or another, which is a whole different story. Or would they be willing to swallow their pride as a reward to Israel? It's an odd sort of linkage that fundamentally suggests that they both would like to compel a deal in Gaza and that they would like a way to climb down. It's nonetheless reassuring that they would like to compel a deal in Gaza, because it's kind of understood that a deal in Gaza is the beginning of the wind down of the war, which again suggests that they don't want a bigger war. Otherwise, they wouldn't necessarily be trying to influence things that way.
Do you think that's their own calculations? They've realised that it might not be a great idea to attack Israel because of the consequences, how Israel might hit them back? Or do you think this is a result of all the very serious diplomatic efforts in recent days from everyone, from the Americans to the Arabs to the Europeans?
I think they're very much connected. The United States, by moving in all the weapons of war that they have moved in, and by threatening them publicly with devastating consequences should they miscalculate, I think changed the equation, rebalanced the equation, and it's clear that despite the antipathy of the Biden administration to the Netanyahu government, this is an exception, and they will come to the aid of Israel. As I've said on numerous occasions, the Iranian regime is rather brittle, and I don't think they would welcome devastating consequences that would almost, well, with a high degree of probability, reignite demonstrations and opposition activity in Iran itself, which could be effective in the context of a war where the regime's infrastructure and centers of power are being attacked and destroyed.
As you know, Dan, there is a great deal of hope that Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority might be the ones to ride into Gaza and save the day and manage a new moderate Palestinian state eventually.
Yeah. Now, look, the hope is that the PA, as the only brand that exists in Palestinian politics, along with Fatah that dominates it, other than Hamas, would take over instead of Hamas, which is a classic case of the less bad option paradigm. It is dispiriting to see the government in Israel, through various channels and spokespersons, trying to equate the PA to Hamas just because the PA does bad things, which they do. The PA also does very good things, like security cooperation with Israel and the West Bank, which Hamas does not. I mean, that is somewhere between infantile and anti-strategic to make that case, but they make it, which is just one reason why the government of Israel stands under great suspicion of trying to prolong the war by rejecting the only possible way out. Now, I say the PA, yeah, as a brand, but Mahmoud Abbas as a brand specifically is very, very distressed. He has avoided elections for close to 2 decades. He is a spent force in Palestinian politics. The more likely scenario for the PA is if, in the context of a hostage for prisoners and end of the war deal, Israel releases Marwan Barghouti. He's from Fatah, but Hamas would have sprung him. It's extremely likely that Barghouti would emerge.
You think he might be on the list of prisoners who are released?
By all reports say that he's number 2 on the list, and many,
he is serving multiple life sentences.
Yeah, I believe 5 counts of murder. But before he got himself implicated in the second Intifada, in what I have to say, horrible, the 5 murders, but the Intifada was about
suicide bombings, right?
I don't think it was suicide bombings; it was shooting. So he was a small player in this horrible thing called the Second Intifada. He was a big player in a peace process that preceded it. And many people in Israel who were just dealing with a horrible situation and understand the less bad option paradigm kind of see Marwan Barghouti having earned his street cred as a terrorist, sad to say that this is how it works sometimes on the Palestinian side, would have credibility to do a deal with Israel on terms that are plausible, which Abbas didn't. Abbas was offered a reasonable, plausible deal by Olmert in 2008-9, and he failed to engage, like Arafat, almost a decade before. Barghouti maybe could do better. So it's interesting that Barghouti could be sprung by Hamas, end up leading the PA instead of Mahmoud Abbas, and that offers some hope to Israelis. It's a reflection of how crazy is the situation that a convicted murderer who doesn't really deny his guilt is in a position of being a beacon of hope.
And he consistently ranks as the most popular potential.
Every poll show he'd clean up because he would have the support both of Hamas and of Fatah, probably. So it's interesting. I don't think Abbas is going to be the savior, but the PA probably is the brand that would enable a day after in Gaza.
Despite Israel being at war, its national security minister continues to challenge the fragile status quo, and not just on the Temple Mount.
Well, here with me in the studio to talk about that, Dan Perry, author of Ask Questions Later and formerly of the Associated Press. So Dan, Ben-Gvir there, once again living up to his reputation as something of an arsonist, a fire starter in the region. The serious question, though, this has been condemned by several Arab countries, as I mentioned. Could it possibly upend the hostage talks that are due to happen on Thursday?
I don't think it will. And one of the reasons is that Netanyahu was so quick in condemning it, making clear that this involves not a change in Israel's policies, but the action of one, rather extremist minister who's trying to rattle the saber to make an internal political point. So I'm sure that the Egyptians and others in the region are mature enough to get this. Whether enough such provocations couldn't incite protests and other and even rioting among Palestinians or who knows, even Israeli Arabs if it goes far enough, I cannot say, and that is a danger. But I think in the current context, this is survivable. Ben-Gvir, however, clearly is a pyromaniac, and he stands for something. And the thing he stands for is to avoid a ceasefire in Gaza, to continue the war while knowing that this means a sacrifice of all the remaining hostages.
Right, he has made it clear what he thinks about the hostage deal or any potential hostage deal. I'm just wondering, how is he doing in the polls since the war began? Because I know the other far-right member of the government, Bezalel Smotrich, has gone down significantly in the polls. What about Ben-Gvir? Does he still have some support?
They ran on a joint list and got, I believe, about a tenth of the vote. And I think however it works out between them, they would still get a tenth of the vote. Maybe even a bit more, because that's what Likud is bleeding seats to the extreme right and also to the center. So Ben-Gvir finds political profit in acting this way. Smotrich, his mini-me at this point, at least is quite open about the fact that he feels indifference for the lives of the hostages. Ben-Gvir still tries to somehow have it both ways, but the two of them really stand for that idea, sacrificing the hostages in order to fight on in Gaza.
Do you think they will be a long-term fixture of Israeli politics then, going forward?
Yeah, I think Israeli politics is coalescing towards a large center that includes parts of the post-Netanyahu Likud. Not that much is left there that could be center, but whatever there is, there will be a center, a left, and a far right that basically speaks in the voice of Ben-Gvir.
The UN warns that the situation could exacerbate, and opposition media is really accusing the Houthis for remaining silent amidst this crisis. And it further illustrates how the international community has pretty much forsaken the Yemeni people to the control of the Houthis, and we see that they prioritize storming UN offices rather than helping their own people, or at least commenting on what's going on in areas that are completely under their control.
All right, Ariel, thank you. And Dan Perry, this is a classic example of what Iran does. It moves into a country that already has an ongoing conflict. It uses that conflict to turn people against each other and use the country for its own aims. And we can see that happening now in Yemen.
You took the words right out of my mouth. I was about to burst in and make my additions here. The Houthis are a disgrace and a blight, and it's fair to say a cancer upon the people of Yemen and the world. A cancer because they stand for death. not only in their slogans on their flags, but in the fact that in their actions that they would attack UN offices that are there to help ease the humanitarian crisis of their own people is just ridiculous. It's like a cartoon figure that the world has put up with this. These actions that are being instigated, backed, funded, and armed by Iran is a fundamental part of the problem. And I think what I want to talk about for a second is moral clarity, okay? We get ourselves involved a little too much in the calculus of who's winning and who lost, and will this deal or that deal constitute an achieving of all the aims. I think Israel would be wise to indeed bite the bullet, and after 10 months of trying, almost 11, end the war and take back the hostages and save their lives, and then figure out what can be done about this entire edifice of ridiculousness that has been erected against it, which amounts to Iran and all its proxies, including Hamas, which is more than an Iranian proxy. It's a reflection of the Palestinian problem that Israel faces. So I think you have two instances, two lessons here. And, you know, the average pro-Israeli partisan is going to like one more than the other. One is that at the end of the day, Israel has to have a wiser policy with the Palestinians. Figure out some way to pacify those it can pacify, separate from them, and do something differently, because this has not worked out well. The other is that the Islamic Republic of Iran really can't be tolerated anymore. What they have done, as reflected most clearly in the case of the Houthis, who've been allowed to get away with impeding much of global maritime trade, is unacceptable. It's not an Israeli problem. It's not even a regional problem. The Islamic Republic of Iran, the theocracy that was installed through a fake referendum in April 1979, is an implacable enemy primarily of the Iranian people. And the world would be doing them a favor if it took action to isolate and ultimately topple them. And I do believe that they know they are vulnerable because they are so reviled. And that may be what is somewhat staying their hand from necessarily sparking a complete regional war, which might not work out so well for them.
All right, Dan, I think that's a great note to end it on. Dan Perry, thank you very much indeed. Ariel, thanks to you as well.